And Mark, let's move into the next team, and that would be the Oakland Raiders. 1 year, I believe. They're 1 year away from being the Vegas Raiders. We're in the comment section for Sean's preview or prediction, which you guys can check out. People were already saying Vegas, baby. So you guys are excited about the Vegas move, it seems. You might be Vegas residents, and those might not be Oakland people. But this Raider team, I think, is interesting, and interesting in the bad way for me, where John Gruden becomes the head coach of this team, and the offseason moves that they make, they get Jordy Nelson, they get Martavius Bryant, they go ahead and get Jared Cook from the Green Bay Packers, they take Doug Martin, who used to be with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I look at this offseason, and the thing that I get John Gruden, where he wants veteran players. That's how he's always been. But I look at this team, and I just think, are we going to be set up for a poor first year with John Gruden and the Oakland Raiders? What do you think? What are you thinking, Mark, about John Gruden and how his first year could be with the Raiders?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about John Gruden and the Raiders, but it's the first thing I'm gonna say a few things off the bat, and I can go into a little bit more. But first thing, it's just at the very least we have this interesting experiment of, can you take somebody who has been out of coaching for this long, had the game change while they were gone, and have them come back in, can they still be successful? Mm-hmm. That's an interesting just experiment. We'll see what happens. But it's also interesting to me that you put it perfectly of John Gruden wants experienced players. He is willing to go out there and pay for some experienced players, which is fascinating because it's kind of been shown that with a couple of different exceptions, like Peyton Manning, and his Broncos when they won the Super Bowl, Tom Brady's Patriots when they won the Super Bowl, but that's a little bit of an anomaly because they've managed to have Tom Brady turn some people into studs.
They also had the best two, like that Broncos team and that Patriot team had the best two quarterbacks that I think we might have seen in our lifetimes.
Exactly. But right now, the kind of way to success is young players. It's have a lot of good, talented young players while they're cheap, and then put the pieces around them. Mm-hmm. And John Gruden seems to kind of be flying in the face of that by saying, no, I want to go ahead and get guys who I know are good. And I appreciate that idea to say, I know these players are talented. I know they can play. I have seen them play. I know what I get out of these guys. Without a doubt, there's value to that. Mm-hmm. But it's just interesting to note that so many teams are using the mindset of, let's be young and then just pay for some of those big name pieces. And that's not what John Gruden is doing. So I think when it comes to the first year, I actually don't expect there to be some huge disaster this first year for everything to go terribly right off the bat. What I'm more concerned about for Oakland Raider fans out there and what will soon be Las Vegas Raiders fans, mm-hmm. because they're not allowed to sell anything with Las Vegas right now. Yeah. They haven't left Oakland yet. And what I think is more likely to happen is this first year, maybe it's not like Chip Kelly and everyone's like, well, yep, he just changed the entire game. And then the next year, nope, Chip Kelly is bad. He needs to get out of here. But I could see something like John Gruden being fine his first year, maybe even okay his second year, but it just kind of falling apart on him after that because he's got a lot of money tied up to guys who are older players. I mean, you got mm-hmm. people who are on the wrong side of 30 getting a good chunk of money, and that's going to eat things up. It'll be fine for this year, although I would imagine for a lot of it, although you still have some injury concerns. You still have some players who have not quite ever lived up to their potential. Mm-hmm. But I just think that it's not a sustainable idea unless it's going to radically change. And in 2 years, this roster is going to look completely different. I don't think it's a sustainable idea that John Gruden is kind of basing his decisions around.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that, and I know that older fans might say, well, Ricky, think about Warren Sapp, because Warren Sapp wasn't exactly the perfect Boy Scout of a player, and it's like, yeah, tell me what to do, coach. I'm going to go ahead and do it. But, like, the thing that confuses me is, not confuses me, that worries me, is first off, I wonder how John Gruden and Marshawn Lynch are going to coexist. How is that relationship going to happen? Did they bring on Doug Martin just in case the Marshawn Lynch and John Gruden connection does not work, and then Doug Martin, the muscle hamster, because, like, I look at their running backs and it's like they've got Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington, who were capable backups behind Latavius Murray a couple years ago. Well, 2 years ago, really, because Marshawn came on last year. And now you've got Marshawn Lynch, you've got Doug Martin, then Richard, then Washington. Is it going to be Martin, Richard, and Washington if Lynch does not work out with how him and Gruden and that relationship goes? Also, I look at this defense, and this defense was not good last year. They ranked 23rd in the league in total yards given up. They also gave up around 23 points per game last year. I look at them and I go, I don't think they got much better. They brought on guys like Rashaan Mevins, who's probably going to play and start for them at corner. They bring in guys like from Minnesota, Emmanuel Lamar, who might go ahead and start at the weak linebacker position for them this year. And like, even I look at their draft picks, I hated their Colton Miller pick, the first round one, because it's not that I hated Colton Miller, it's that I hated drafting him as high as they did, especially with what was on the board. And it's also interesting that one of the guys they picked up in the draft was Arden Key, which he's been, like, early on, beginning of the season last year, I remember doing a segment by myself because Brandon was on vacation, and it's like, will Arden Key be the best defensive prospect in college football? Because he had that kind of talent, but it just didn't work out with his off-the-field issues that he had, and really the big question was, does he want to play the game of football? That's why I'm like, really? Like, that's a guy that John Gruden and this Raider team wants to go ahead and draft, with John Gruden being your head coach? But, like, there are other guys like Mo Hurst, friend of the show, who I love that pickup. P.J. Hall should be another good one on the interior of that defensive line. But my biggest question for this team is, how is this defense going to play in year one with John Gruden, who is he had good defenses in the past, especially with Tampa Bay. He had a good defense when he was there. I know it was like a decade ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if this defense is not much improved from last year, and this team is about 5-6 wins like they were last year.
Yeah, it's going to be tough because John Gruden has been known for having some pretty good defenses. John Gruden's also been known for not ever really having a good quarterback. I mean, he's had good quarterbacks, but he's never had a quarterback talent level-wise of Derek Carr's level.
Mm-hmm.
Derek Carr, you throw him on that Tampa Bay Super Bowl team, and obviously, he would have been a teeny tiny little baby at that point, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But, let's just pretend that he exists at that time, and it would have been phenomenal. I mean, that would have been an absolutely incredible team in that case. But all that aside, yeah, I don't necessarily know the defense is going to get that much better. But John Gruden's done well with defense. And John Gruden's one of those coaches that really can inspire players to play harder. And you got a motivator in that case. For me, the concerns really just come down to, is this kind of an outdated, is he going to have an outdated view of coaching in the NFL? Is he going for players that were good 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of like the thing I'm going to compare it to is if it's like a coach that coached in like the 90s. So like I'm going to say not like a Phil Jackson, because Phil Jackson success-wise is on the level of like Bill Belichick. But if it was like I'm trying to think of like maybe a Pat Riley or like a solid coach from like 90s basketball where you had big men and the big men actually played in the post and rough guys up. It would be like if you got that coach now in the NBA where it's all spread the floor out. You've got Euro softer bigs down low. Everything's about the three ball. And this guy comes in and goes, yeah, we're going to do it like the old way. I wonder if that's going to be John Gruden in this case, where it's like, we're going to play football like we did in the 90s and early 2000s, or mainly for him, it was the late 90s, early 2000s. We're going to play football like it was back then. It's like, that's not how it is now. That is not how football is played anymore. And I mean, to go back on your point of like quarterbacks that he had, when he was in Oakland, really he had 1 year of Jeff George, Donald Hollis, and Wade Wilson were not Deadpool Wade Wilson, just Wade Wilson, in 98. And then he had Rich Gannon for his remaining 3 years in Oakland, whereas Tampa, most of them were Brad Johnson, and then the last three were like Brian Griese, Chris Sims, Jeff Garcia before he left the Raiders in 2008. And the thing that you brought up during the Broncos segment that I'll bring up now and kind of throw your way is what are we expecting from Derek Carr? Because this is Derek Carr. No one's saying he's a bad quarterback by any means. He's a guy that completes over 60% of his passes, throws for almost 4,000 yards in a season, has good touchdown to interception ratios, not the best in year 2, year 4, but the records of his teams, 3-13, 7-9, 6-9, the anomaly being that 2016 where he went 12-3 with the Raiders.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see Derek Carr because he's been this guy that since he came into the league and kind of surprised everybody, everyone's expected great things out of him. And for the most part, the team as a whole, the Oakland Raiders, have not actually lived up to those expectations. Now, it's not fair to blame all of that on Derek Carr or to kind of pin it on him and his success, but I do think that there is a certain level of expectations that you have when you were able to, come out here and just surprise everybody for how good he was rookie year, then coming in second year, getting better, that third year staying on par, and this fourth year he's come down a little bit, but he's always a guy who's going to kind of be a little bit of a gunslinger. He's going to throw a lot of touchdowns, doesn't throw a terrible amount of interceptions, so you're doing all right with that. But I think where people kind of expected they had this 3,200 yards, then almost 4,000 yards. I think people were expecting essentially like the next Drew Brees to come out here, a guy who can just sling it all day, all over you. And I think Derek Carr showed us that that's not necessarily who he is. He's not going to be that Drew Brees throws for 5,000 yards every season type of guy. Maybe he becomes more of that Matt Stafford type of guy, really leads the team, can get it done on his own. He's proven that he has before, but isn't going to be that transcendent type of quarterback that all on his own makes that team a playoff team, and all on his own can lead that team to a Super Bowl, can do it a game or two here and there, really drag that team into a victory. But Derek Carr very simply just needs more around him. I mean, he's probably had a leading or at least close to the top for dropped passes, for quarterbacks. I mean, he's had plenty of times where he's put it right there for his guy, and Amari Cooper drops the ball. Well, and that's not going to be his fault necessarily, but those are the things that, as a team, he's not going to be able to single-handedly overcome that.
Well, and here, I'll throw you this question then, because you mentioned, like, Amari Cooper drops the ball, where the two main guys that they bring in to be his new wide receiver weapons, Jordy Nelson, who just in recent, first off, talk about guys who are on the wrong side of 30. That's Jordy Nelson. He's 33 right now. He's going to be 33 this whole season. He won't turn 34 until around just after the NFL draft next season. So he'll be 33 this entire year. He's a guy that had the injury in 2015, missed all of that season, came back, was an 1,000-yard wide receiver, had the second most touchdowns that he's ever had in a year, but he had Aaron Rodgers. What we saw in year 2, the 2017, now I know Brett Hundley, people are going to say, whoa, Ricky, are you comparing Derek Carr to Brett Hundley? No, but what I'm saying is he didn't have Aaron Rodgers out there. I'm not saying the stats might be as low as they were, where he had not even 500 yards and 6 touchdowns on the year, but is it going to be that, like, what kind of receiver are we going to see with Derek Carr, not Aaron Rodgers? Are we going to see an over 1,000 wide receiver? Are we going to see maybe like a 600-yard Jordy Nelson? Then you've got Martavius Bryant, who he's only been in the league since 2014. He has never had over 765 yards in a season. That was the most. He didn't play 2016 because he was suspended. And last year, he only had just over 600 yards, and he had a catch percentage. It was his highest, but a catch percentage of 59.5. Did they even add the right pieces in the wide receiver core to go ahead and help Derek Carr? You can throw in Jared Cook if you want to as well.
Yeah, it's tough because, you got a guy like Bryant who's kind of the perennial not living up to his potential. Every year people expect great things out of him, and every year he doesn't necessarily completely disappoint you, but you're like, oh, I thought there'd be more. You got Cook, who is that guy who he's going to surprise you for a few games, and then he's going to completely disappear for a while. You got Jordy Nelson coming off of an injury. Jordy Nelson and Aaron Rodgers were an amazing connection, but without Jordy Nelson, Aaron Rodgers can do just fine. Mm-hmm. Aaron Rodgers will do fine with anybody that you throw out there.
Well, he's got that Tom Brady type of element to him where it's like, I'm just going to throw the ball to whoever, or like a Drew Brees kind of attitude where it's like, I'm going to throw the ball to whoever. I'm not just going to throw it to one wide receiver and have him be my main guy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, Derek Carr is not necessarily that type of quarterback, and I think it's unfair of anyone to expect him to be that type of quarterback now. Now that we've actually learned a little bit more about who he is, he's not going to be Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Tom Brady. He's not going to be one of these guys. He's going to be somebody who does need a team around him, and I don't necessarily think that the Oakland Raiders did a terrible job. They're buying in on some potential. They are getting a guy who's a proven veteran. Mm-hmm. Jared Cook's been there, so that's not too big of an issue. They're taking a shot. They didn't get the guys like Allen Robinson or Allen Hurns, like those big name type of guys. They didn't get a chance to get one of them. They didn't take a shot on a Dez Bryant, which many people would consider quite a risk to do.
Hey, he's still there. They can still get him.
He's still available. They didn't take a shot at a Brandon Marshall or anything like that. They kind of went a little bit of this could blow up in our faces. But overall, I would say that, it was a fairly safe bet to go for guys like Jordy Nelson, who have pretty much always been a proven commodity in his career. Mm-hmm. The problem is going to be they're not necessarily players that are going to be absolute, without a doubt, top wide receiving unit. And when you then are going to add in the fact of a guy like Jordy Nelson, you got him for what, 1 or 2 years, and then you got to reassess your wide receiver situation. And there's plenty of the teams in the NFL that you can ask. It's not easy to go out there and just find a number one wide receiver.
Well, and
there are teams that will fail at that year after year after year.
And the thing I'm looking at is, while you've been talking, I've been looking at their schedule, and I'll be completely honest, their first 6 games, maybe even their first 10 games, I don't like them. Like, you're going to open up the season, yeah, it's in Oakland, but it's not that far of a drive for the LA Rams. That's a loss. You're playing the Broncos in Mile High week 2. That could be a loss. The Dolphins will be interesting. Yeah, you're traveling to Miami, but that could be a winnable game. Playing the Browns in Oakland, winnable game. But then you're back to playing the Chargers, who I think will be a better team than the Raiders. They win. And then it's like the Seahawks. What kind of Seahawk team are we going to get? But are the Raiders going to be good enough to beat the Seahawks in Oakland? The Colts, I mean, originally I was like, hey, Andrew Luck might not be 100%. The Raiders can get a win off the bye. Now I'm thinking I'm going to switch that one. Andrew Luck looks like he's back. He's a full participant at Colts camp. So, I mean, the Colts could easily win that game against the Raiders. Against the Niners, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, which quarterback do you like better in that one? And then you got the Chargers before kind of having a back half of the schedule that is kind of littered with teams like the Bengals, the Cardinals, the Ravens, and your only hard opponents are the 3 divisional games between Broncos and Chiefs and then the Steelers.
Yeah, it's an interesting schedule for the Raiders. I mean, it's not a terrible schedule, but it's not necessarily easy as well. They don't have the same advantages I talked about with like the Broncos. They're hard games. Well, they're the home team, so that makes it a little bit easier. They're some of those a little bit easier games. Those more games where you expect them to win, like a Browns. They're at home. Seahawks. A lot of people are down on the Seahawks this year, but the Raiders are the home team in that case. Some of those easier games necessarily like a Bengals game, but I don't think the Bengals are going to be that bad of a team this year. That's one of your road games there. So you don't have those same advantages that your other opponent had, or your division opponent, the Broncos just had. But I do think that it's not a terrible schedule, so it is winnable. They can do well. Could they be a 5-6 win team? Yeah, they definitely could. But can they get to that 500, maybe 9-7 level as well? Yeah, I definitely think that they could as well. They can bounce around a little bit, and it really is going to depend on a few different things. How does that team respond to new coach John Gruden? How does Derek Carr continue to evolve in his career now going into year number 5? And then a really important part, injuries. How is that going to play a part for the Oakland Raiders? Because on paper, there's definitely quite a few concerns for them. But, maybe a guy like Jordy Nelson, he stays healthy all the time. They don't have to worry about that. The Raiders have a good offensive line. That stays together. No injury or issues there. The defense, it's not deep. So if they start to have injury issues, that defense is going to get a little shaky pretty fast. But if they can stay healthy, which is a tough thing to do in the NFL, of course, but if they can stay healthy, then I think they can steal away some of these games.
Well, and that kind of sounds like to me what you were saying is we'll get to the final thought. So unless you had anything else to add, is that pretty much your final thought on the Raiders?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay, so for my final thoughts is, first off with the Seahawks, I know that most of us are saying that, oh, they're going to be a worse team this year. But let's be honest. Like, when I say worst team, I mean like 7-9, 8-8. Like, maybe 9-7 at best. Like, they're not going to be a double-digit playoff team, but they're not going to be like a 5-11 team this year. I just feel like the Raiders this year, the defense is not going to be as good as other teams. It's not going to be a phenomenal defense. We'll see how that grows with John Gruden as coach. And then the offense. Like, I don't know what to expect from that run game. I don't know what to expect from these old wide receivers coming in like Jordy Nelson and Martavius. Well, Jordy Nelson, a little bit older than Martavius Bryant, coming in to help this team. And I wonder if we're going to look and say, man, they should have taken this guy in the first round instead of Colton Miller. Could have really helped that team. But this is where Raider fans, I want you guys to come in. Let us know down below. Where are we right about your team? Where are we wrong? Where should we have hope? Where do you have hope? What do you like? What do you don't like heading into the 2018 season?